Wait, let me plug in.
All right, Bruins Leafs happening once again, and I'm Ian McLaren of Locked On Boston Bruins, joined by Mike DiStefano of Locked On Maple Leafs. And we're gonna preview this series, which I can't believe it's happening again, but here we go. We're gonna start by talking about some of the biggest storylines around this series for each team. Mike, what do you got?
I mean, there's a lot of big storylines going on with the Maple Leafs. I mean, when it comes to this matchup in particular, I think the big storyline is, can the Leafs finally get over the hump? Can they beat the big bad Bruins? Like, we don't have to go too far in this team's history to, find where Leaf fans would be scared of this series. I mean, think back to 2013 when it was 4-1, 2018, 2019. So, I think the big storyline in Toronto is just flat out, can the Leafs get it done? Can they beat the Bruins? And I think it's going to be difficult. I think it's going to be a terrific series. I'm really looking forward to it. But I do think it's going to be vastly different from the other ones. Like, I'm sure you feel the same way. The fact that there's no Patrice Bergeron,
Yeah,
there's
for sure.
no Zdeno Chara, who was a big factor back in the day. Like, I think that definitely makes things different, I guess, and maybe not different in a bad way or in a good way, just different overall. So I am excited to see what this year's edition of Leafs Bruins in a playoff format looks like.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It is totally different from when these two teams last played in the playoffs 2019. For me, that was like the last run for the Bruins core that had been so successful. It's such a different team now, from 2019 to
Yeah.
2024, and notably with Patrice Bergeron not around, David Krejci as well. That's the biggest storyline for me for the Bruins, is looking at having Bergeron and Krejci down the middle for so long, and now you've got Charlie Coyle, Pavel Zacha down the middle, coming off career seasons, but obviously the playoffs is such a different animal.
So
My big question is whether or not they can produce while
yeah.
kind of also containing the core four for the Maple Leafs up front. That's a huge question mark for me, of course.
Yeah, like when I was previewing the show on Locked On Leafs, Dave and I'm looking down the middle at each center core, and I mean, I'm thinking, okay, advantage Toronto. Like,
Yeah.
as like for years, the Boston Bruins have had this incredible depth down the middle, but then when Bergeron and Krejci both retire, that really left a void. Like, how concerning is it going into a playoff series when you look at the center depth, which we know is a very important, especially when it comes to the playoffs. And you're
Mhm.
sitting there looking at Zaka, Coyle, Geeky,
Yeah.
and Boqvist down the middle.
Yeah, I mean, the Bruins did call up John Beecher from the AHL on Friday. He was their second best faceoff man this season in limited sample size, but yeah, it's obviously not the same Bruins down the middle as they had been, and there's real question marks. And now it is interesting to look back at last year against the Florida Panthers, and you had Bergeron out of that series for the first 4 games, and the Bruins had a 3-1 lead after that point. Obviously, not saying they were better off without him, but still, they were able to find something that worked there with Charlie Coyle, with Brad Marchand, and then you have the Zacha and David Pastrnak combination. So it has proven to be effective, but again, who knows in a playoff series, and especially against a Toronto offense that is much more loaded than Boston's up front for sure.
I think another storyline for the Maple Leafs going into the series is, what's the blue line going to look like?
Mm.
And in Boston, it looks like things are pretty settled and pretty set. Like, you guys have had three consistent, solid pairings, throughout the
Mm.
whole season, and you've got top studs like Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy. It's not necessarily the case in Toronto,
Mm.
and what worries a lot of Leaf fans is the fact that Sheldon Keefe never really was able to find a group of 6 guys that he liked, that he felt comfortable with. I mean,
Mm.
right up until the final game of the season, game 82, he's still kind of changing around the D pairings and trying to find things that fit. We have an idea of what might work, right now with Riley Labushkin and then Benoit and Jake McCabe. The third pair, there's still a question mark whether or not TJ Brody's even going to be in the lineup,
Oh,
which
wow.
is, yeah, it's
Yeah.
quite insane to say, considering how important and vital he's been to the Leafs blue line of late.
Yeah.
This game has seriously dropped off this year. So the question is now, okay, is it Joel Edmondson and Timothy Liljegren? Is it Edmondson and Brody? Does Edmondson fall out of it? Does Labushkin come out of, does Labushkin come out and Brody go back with Riley? There's still so many question marks on the blue line. And I think that's a big time concern for a lot of Leaf fans going into it is, defense wins championships first and foremost.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
just not exactly sure if that blue line is going to be able to hold up for a long playoff run. So that's another big concern and storyline heading into the playoffs for Toronto.
Yeah, I've been saying that as well. Obviously, focusing on the defense, so I'll touch on the goaltending later on as well. But for the Bruins, they have had a pretty set top 6 all season long. They have been shuffling the bottom pairing around a bit. Obviously, the top 4 of Lindholm, McAvoy, Brandon Carlo, Matt Grzelcyk, pretty much set in stone. Kevin Shattenkirk and Parker Wotherspoon have been rotating in and out. They got a young guy in Mason Lohrei who stepped up. But the one guy who has been pleasant surprises is Andrew Peeke, who they picked up at the trade deadline from the Columbus Blue Jackets. He's filling in for Derek Forbort, kind of with that physical penalty killing kind of role. So he's pretty much locked in there. We'll see what the other pairings are, but I think that consistency for the Bruins over that. I mean, you didn't even mention Connor Timmins, who in my mind probably should be in there as well. I know he had that mono belt with mono, maybe not getting into the top minutes, but he's still for me a decent option for many other teams. So we'll see what the defensive matchups are and whether or not the Bruins can take advantage of that uncertainty on the blue line for the Maple Leafs. Coming up after the break, we're going to discuss some key players to watch, and we'll touch on that as this Bruins Leafs playoff preview continues. If you are looking for life insurance options here, then there's no better place to check out than Policygenius, the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with a financial safety net starting today. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options even offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policygenius helps you compare your options from top companies, and their team of licensed experts is on hand to help talk you through it. Policygenius gives you unbiased advice from a licensed expert support team, and there's thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who found the best fit for their needs. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policygenius. Just head to policygenius.com/lockedonnhl or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonnhl. All right, continuing on our playoff preview here of the Bruins and the Maple Leafs. Just a quick reminder before we get back into it to check out Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories, news, analysis, opinions all across the sports world, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And Mike, we're turning our attention to key players to watch here in this series. Obviously, there's a few Leafs that jump out. Who are you going to start with?
Yeah, I mean it's the big boys, right? That's going to be they got to lead the Maple Leafs through this whole playoff. So and that's kind of been a challenge for them throughout the course of their playoff history, especially against the Bruins. So definitely going to be a big spotlight on those guys. I guess we'll start with
Mhm.
Austin Matthews, the best of the bunch, right? The guy's
Yeah.
going to have a chance to snag an MVP already. Corralled himself another Rocket Richard trophy with
Mhm.
69 goals. Still just outrageous to me
Yeah.
that he was able to do that. But can he continue that forward into the playoffs? Like that's the big question, right? Last year he had a good first round against Tampa Bay, but then went radio silent in round 2 against the Florida Panthers when, there's speculation that there was injury involved there
Mm.
based on how he looked. I agree. He never came out and said that there was something bothering him, but regardless, 0 goals in 5 games, and they found themselves eliminated pretty quickly in round 2. So his success clearly is what's going to drive the Maple Leafs. So can he continue down this torrid scoring path and continue to score in virtually every single game? If he could do that, I think the Maple Leafs clearly have a good chance to compete here and maybe even win the series. Obviously, Mitch Marner's another player that the playoff demons are there. He
Right.
did have a pretty good series against the Bruins, if I recall, a couple of years ago. But he's always been much maligned for being a guy that fades in April when the going gets tough, and he's got to get in there and play against physical, and guys start leaning on him and taking ice away. The narrative is that he shies away from that and kind of fades, but he's going to need to battle through that and fight through that and
Right.
get Toronto, try and produce for the Maple Leafs. And I believe they're going to start on separate lines,
Mm.
which is interesting because for the last few seasons, those guys have been pretty well attached at the hip. But, there's been portions of the season this year where they've been taken off each other's line and they've been able to find some success individually without each other. So I think they spread the scoring by removing those two from each other. So this, of course, is assuming that Max Domi is healthy and ready to go. But
Mm.
when you got both of those players, if they're at their best, driving 2 different lines, they can produce a lot of points for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So those are kind of 2 guys that you're going to have to be certainly going to have to be locked into if you are the Boston Bruins.
Yeah. And on the other side for me, it's obviously, I'll talk about David Pastrnak in a moment, but the key players to watch for me are guys who don't play at the same time, and that's Linus Ullmark, Jeremy Swayman. I've argued
Oh,
all season long that the reason the Bruins have been able to succeed this season is because of the goaltending. If you look at their underlying numbers, they're regularly outshot, they're regularly out attempted by the opposition. The Bruins ranked third in the NHL in save percentage overall and at 5-on-5. The fact that they can have um, an elite option in net every single night through the regular season was a huge advantage for them. And uh, on Thursday, general manager Don Sweeney said they had a plan for the goalies. The same guy who reportedly tried to trade Linus Ullmark at the trade deadline. You obviously, with goaltending, you have a guy that has to sit every game. So who's going to start? And the big question for me is, are they going to continue to employ that rotation?
yeah.
Or will they go kind of with the hot hand,
So,
keep
so
a
what do
guy
you
in
think?
until they
What do you
lose?
think is going to happen there? Like,
I
you
really
got a
don't know. I
lean?
think I think it'll be Jeremy Swayman who will get the start in game one because he had pretty good numbers against the Leafs this season.
Hmm.
Um, I think I don't think they're gonna do like one guy gets the odd game starts and one guy gets the even starts. It'll probably be at the very least the first sign of trouble, you just go with the next guy kind of thing.
But what if
So
there's no trouble? I mean, do they just roll with Swayman? Like that's the interesting thing about the goalie conundrum that they have
yeah,
out in Boston with you guys because I know that I've heard them say they do plan to deploy a tandem
yeah,
tandem and net throughout the playoffs, just like they've done in the regular season. It worked in the regular season, so the
Yep.
assumption is it'll work in the playoffs. But that being said, how do you pull a guy? I mean, if Jeremy Swayman goes out and puts the Bruins win, let's say 3-1, and he
Yeah.
has 32 saves, a couple of big stops. You're going to pull that guy out of the lineup for game two just
No.
because you had
Yeah, I
a
don't think
plan to
so.
go with Allmark. Only the Blue Jays do stuff like that. Come on,
Yeah, exactly.
the Blue
Yeah,
Jays
that's
and
a prime
Ravens.
example. I had talked about that last year, how you can have the plan, but things change, right? Like you mentioned, Toronto Blue Jays, Jose Barrios, you're cooking. There's no reason to take the guy out. Ideally, Swayman, say he starts game one, stays hot, the Bruins go 16-0. There's no question, but
Right.
I think Allmark will be in there at some point. Looking back at last year, one of the big advantages the Panthers had over the Bruins in that series was that Alex Lyon played so great down the stretch, but they went to Bobrovsky earlier in the series than the Bruins did with Swayman, and that was to their advantage. So
Yeah.
at the very least, give him a couple games, but I could see a situation where one guy doesn't get more than two starts if there is any signs of trouble. But it's going to be very interesting. I'm not sure what Jim Montgomery is going to do there, but my suspicion is that Swayman will at least get the start for game one, and then we'll see how it goes from there.
Well, on the opposite end, things aren't as solidified in Toronto. At least there's two goaltenders who you have faith in that can give you elite play. Whoever ends up starting game 1, 2, 3, whichever game they go, whoever you
Yeah,
throw in, you're going to get good goalie play. Not necessarily as comfortable in Toronto with it being
right.
Samsonov and Joseph Wall. Samsonov likely to be the starter. It's yet to be announced, but I think it's extremely likely that he's going to be the guy. And this is someone who
Right.
was quite literally placed on waivers, made it through waivers back in December. And, he's fought back and he's played well and he's earned the number one role back, but it's always up in the noggin here. Well,
Mhm.
3-4 months ago, the guy, couldn't make a save. And if you look at the last couple of starts, it was not great for Ilya
Mhm.
Samsonov either. So the last two starts, he's allowed 5 goals in each of those games. So there's some anxiousness when it comes to the Maple Leafs goaltenders as well. But like I said, I would take either Swayman or Olmark over both of the dudes that
Yeah,
the Maple Leafs get to throw out there. So
sure.
it's a good problem to have if you're Boston. So be
Yep.
happy and be
Yeah,
lucky
yeah,
that you have two solid dandies over there.
yeah. And then I have to mention before we take another break here, David Pastrnak, obviously a guy to watch. Just a few points shy of his career high from last year, but his assist total was smashing his career high. He's become not just an elite goal scorer, but he's become a play driver for the Bruins. And I would love to see him. There have been times where he's been criticized for turning the puck over too much. It's because he has it on his stick a lot, but also for maybe trying to distribute when he could just get a shot on net. And like you're saying, if Samsonov is perhaps a bit fragile or there's a chance to beat him there and take advantage of that, just get the puck on net. And Pastrnak could have a pretty big series against either of those goalies. Pastrnak, yeah, he's not
Yeah.
in the MVP conversation, just outside of it because of the big numbers that Matthews, Kucherov, McKinnon, McDavid put up. But for me, he's had a very impressive season for the Boston Bruins. We're going to discuss some more X factors and make some predictions on this series here as this Leafs Bruins preview podcast continues. There's going to be some heavy competition over the next couple of weeks around the NHL. And if you want to have something to do that's not hockey related, I can't recommend Monopoly Go even more. I've got a competitive side and it's a huge fan of Monopoly Go. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you can play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in some crazy locations, building up some cool cities, bringing in big money. The best part is messing with my friends. I can charge them rent on iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly. I can also heist their vaults of riches for myself, and the leaderboards show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. Break out your monocles and your top hats. Download Monopoly Go free on the App Store or Google Play. Get in the game, join your friends, and become the tycoon that you were destined to be. All right, it's time to talk about some X factors and make some predictions. Who are some kind of under the radar players that Bruins fans should be aware of there in the blue and white?
So I'll throw a three pack at you. I'll give you a couple forwards and then a defensive that I think is going to make a big impact here. I'll start with the D man, I suppose, and I think Jake McCabe is going to be an X
Hmm.
factor for the Maple Leafs. He's kind of taken over as the team's most reliable defenseman. I believe he's going to get the Pastrnak matchup, and he's going to be in charge of trying to keep him in check as much as possible. So that's one that you're definitely going to have to keep an eye on. And he's a physical guy. I mean, we saw the last time these two teams played, he got up in Marchand's grill. So he's not shy when it comes to getting physical, and I believe it'll end up being quite the physical matchup. And he's someone who's
Hmm.
going to be in the mix the entire time. So he's one of the guys, especially on the blue line, someone who can make a big impact, either positively or negatively if he's not on his A game. Two other ones I'm going to throw at you. It's not necessarily a surprise name, or someone who is going to come out of nowhere, but Tyler Bertuzzi for
Hmm.
me, a
Yep.
former Boston Bruin, obviously,
Yep.
and you saw firsthand how well he played last season in the postseason.
Hmm.
His game translates really well to the playoff style hockey, just kind of a hard nosed, go to the net type of player, and another dude who doesn't shy away from getting into the mix. So I
Yep.
think that Tyler Bertuzzi, who's really found some good chemistry playing alongside Austin Matthews of late, he had a really tough start to the season, but ended on a great note. Ended up getting 20 goals after going, I think it was like 30 something goals or games without a goal. It was
Oh,
insane. He was so snake bitten. It
yeah.
was wild. But he started scoring towards the end, and I think that's what's going to be key is secondary scoring for
Mm.
Toronto. I
Yep.
think the big boys will end up kind of silencing each other, canceling each other out when in terms of like Pastrnak, Marchand, and then Matthews and Nylander and Marner. But then, all right, who can get the secondary scoring? Is it
Right.
going to be Bertuzzi, or is it going to be a guy like Matthew Nyes, Max Domi, John Tavares? Can those guys score enough and outscore the depth on the Boston Bruins? Because I think that's ultimately, I think that's an advantage for Toronto. I think they're a much
Yeah.
deeper team up front,
For sure.
and they're going to have to make it matter, make it mean something by scoring and putting pressure on the Bruins' depth.
Right.
So I think that a guy like Tyler Bertuzzi and Matthew Nyes too. I think those guys have chances to be big time X factors. And then I'm going to throw this one out there. It's not a player, but special teams. I think
Mm.
special teams is always going to be an X factor, and in
Yep.
the regular season series between these two teams, Boston had the clear advantage. I think they had like a 91% PK, 30% power play. It was really the difference in the series this year,
Hmm.
throughout the four games. But if Toronto can clamp down, if they can stop Boston's power play, if they can figure out a way to slow down Pastrnak, then I think they have a good shot at winning this playoff series. The power play had been struggling mightily, just 12.5% since March 1st. So
Oh
it's
well.
not, yeah, it has not been great heading into the postseason. But when you look at the collection of players that do play on that top power play unit, you just have to think that with the playoffs starting, everyone's back at zero. It's a new season, effectively. Hopefully, they can get it going, and that power play can be a factor as well. Because I think special teams is always a big reason for why teams win and lose in the playoffs. So
100%.
whoever wins the special teams battle will have the best shot at winning the series.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with that. And at the same time, Boston's power play was pretty bad over the last little bit as well. I think Pastrnak and Brad Marchand combined for like 2 goals over the last couple months of the season on the power play.
Yeah.
So if they can't get it going, that's a big advantage for the
Five
Leafs
on
as well.
five. Let's just play 5-on-5 for the
Yeah,
whole game. Let's
yeah,
go. I'm down
exactly.
for it too. Come on.
Yeah. In terms of X factors for the Bruins, there's a couple that jump to mind. Jake DeBrusk always seems to up his game against the Leafs in the playoffs. Who knows if he can bait somebody into a suspension once again, but he's been a bit obviously inconsistent throughout his career. Again, this season, quiet down the stretch, but hopefully, as a pending free agent, he can up his game for Boston's benefit and his own in the summer. Trent Frederick's another guy. Look at, you were talking about secondary scoring. These two guys, DeBrusk and Trent Frederick, very quiet down the stretch. They need to step up. Frederick especially can put the puck in the net, but he can also get under guys' skin. The trick will be doing it in a way where he's not finding himself in the box at the same time. And then lastly, got to talk about Brad Marchand, the captain, looking to make his mark as the guy with the C. Hugely disappointing result last year, the last few years, really. And with that C on his chest, you got to know he's going to be wanting to make his mark and help this team get further than they did last year. It's just going to be a tough task. Like, I didn't really have high expectations, kind of cup contender wise, for the Bruins this season. They exceeded all my expectations in the regular season, largely because of the goaltending. And I think you talked about it as well. Like, it's going to come down to whether Boston's defense and goaltending is enough to withstand Toronto's attack, and whether Boston can take advantage of the goaltending on the other end and the defense, enough to get by. It's going to be a super tight series, I think. Probably going to go to the distance. What are you predicting for this series, Mike?
Yeah, on Lockdown Leafs, we did our prediction show yesterday, and I'm not going to veer away from it. So I'll just basically copy and paste what I said there. I believe this series does go the distance as well. I think we see 7 games, and for the first time since 1959, I believe the Toronto Maple Leafs will come out victorious in a 7-game series against the Boston Bruins. I just don't think that. Like I know that lots of Leaf fans are terrified, shaking in their boots, and yes, Boston, was pretty much at the top, the division all year long, and I know they have home ice advantage and all that is all fine. But I do believe that this is a much different Boston team than the Leafs have played in the past. No Bergeron, no Krejci. I mean, Tuukka Rask also not there. I know they've got good goalies who've come in behind him, but he was a big part of that success as well. Zdeno Chara, like we talked about already, and a plethora of other guys who were big time factors. Milan Lucic back in the day.
Yep.
So I do think that things are going to be different, and I see Toronto winning this series. I think it's going to be close. I think that each game is going to be probably pretty tight, but ultimately, I see Toronto winning it on, I guess, the Bruins ice this time in a Game 7 matchup.
Yeah, I mean, it would be foolish not to suggest this game's going to go 7, because of the importance of defense, goaltending, and the history the Leafs have of their key guys not stepping up against the Bruins. I'm gonna go Bruins in 7. Not gonna make the mistake of, like I did in 2013, congratulating Leafs fans that I know for winning the series when it's 4-1. I won't make that mistake, but I think it could easily go either way. But I think the Bruins defense, goaltending will be enough to get it done. Not convinced there's anything beyond this for them, but I think that's how it's going to shake out. Either way, it's going to go 7. It's going to cause a stir. social media is going to be unbearable. But yeah, that's playoff hockey, and we're looking forward to it. Game 1, 8 p.m. Saturday night in Boston. Mike, before we part, let people know where they can find you and your co-host on social media, and where they can find the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, you can find the Locked On Leafs podcast wherever you get your podcast from, whichever streaming platform you use for to get your audio cast. But we're also up on YouTube, and we just surpassed the 5,000 subscriber mark, which
Oh,
we're
very
happy
nice.
about. We're actually doing a Matthews jersey giveaway because of it. So,
Oh, very
yeah.
nice.
So if you want to head over to Locked On Leafs, quickly subscribe. You can still get in on the giveaway as well. So
Perfect.
go and do that. But you can also find myself on X, as we now call
Yep.
it, at Mickey_Canuck.
Very nice. And people can find Locked On Bruins, of course, everywhere. Your favorite podcast app. Also on YouTube. Follow along at Locked NHL Bruins, at Ian C. McLaren. And Mike, thanks for doing this. May the better team win, however it goes. And yeah, good luck. Good luck in the playoffs.
You too, man. It was fun. We'll have to definitely do another crossover throughout the series,
Definitely.
though.